All right, let's move on to Bayern Bremen. Um, Harry Kane, he gets his record, fastest player to reach 100 goals. I have to say in the modern era, because I did a big piece on this for Transfermarkt, and it turns out a bunch of guys in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Spain got to 100 goals than faster than Harry Kane did. And there was a couple guys in France as well in the 30s, right? Having said that, we're not actually 100% sure whether all competitive games are accounted for those. So, let's say it's the modern era. He beat a record by Erling Haaland and Cristiano Ronaldo. They both did it in 100 goals in 105, right? He did it in 104. Just remarkable. Scores his 18th penalty in a row. Didn't get a hat trick this time, but he is just scoring for fun. And there was some really interesting comments by him post-match too about his future. And there has been some noise coming out of England, and he went very much out of his way burying most of these rumors that he was heading back to the United Kingdom anytime soon. In fact, there is now noise about a contract renewal even with Harry Kane, which is an interesting thing. I think his state of mind, I think he's playing for a club that is very much built around him, where he is taking over a leadership mantle. Is being pushed into a leadership situation, especially with Thomas Müller gone. And I think he enjoys it. He enjoys playing for one of the biggest clubs in Europe and being a leading voice in a very similar way than he was at Tottenham.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. He's at a club that's built around him. Last week we talked about how he's potentially looking better without Musiala in the team, which will be interesting because there was pictures of him returning to training at Bayern this week, so it might not be long before he's back in the squad. But, the general idea was that he's taken on a more kind of leadership role and a more active role on the pitch. He's kind of filled in. He's essentially been as a number 9 and a number 10 for more often not in this Bayern team, scoring goals for fun. And yeah, I think we totally take for granted just how well he's done at Bayern. You look at it kind of, I remember when he first joined Bayern, I was quite surprised that the club spending that amount of money on a player of his age and thinking, well, they're only going to get 2 or 3 good years out of him before he maybe starts to look his age and gets a bit older. But then if you look at the market and how it's kind of exploded since then, and I saw a really interesting video of Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, the former Chelsea striker, and he was being asked about basically all the strikers in the Premier League and asked how many of them are, or not even the Premier League, just kind of famous strikers, and how many of them are world class. And he's like, Alexander Isaac, not world class. Nicholas Jackson, not world class. And he was just going through them all. We got to Harry Kane. He's like, yeah, world class. And there's one other player, I can't remember who it was that he mentioned.
It better be Lewandowski.
I don't think he got asked about Lewandowski. It was mostly like English or Premier League specific, to be fair, because it was an English publication he was doing the thing for. But it got me thinking that, he obviously knows more than most because he was a tremendous striker in his day. But I think there's definitely something to be said that the kind of inflation around strikers in the last 4 or 5 years has been insane. And, without trying to kind of turn a positive into a negative at Bayern here, I think Nicholas Jackson's a perfect example of that. Now, that's got nothing to do with Bayern, and maybe he could turn into a great player for Bayern. They might choose to buy him. He could go on to be a great player. But the amount of money that Chelsea spent on him when he was completely unproven, and the whole fiasco he's gone through at Chelsea since then, and there's a dozen players like that in the Premier League and in Spain. And, we've seen plenty of them leave the Bundesliga, and we've said ourselves, like Benjamin Sesko, for example, although he got a goal again for Man United this weekend, I watched him and I thought he looked completely lost on the pitch. He looked like a kid who's still learning his trade, but he's already had a transfer fee that is going to define his career one way or another. And it doesn't really feel very fair. But the point I'm trying to make here, trying to get back to it, is in hindsight, the money Bayern spent on Harry Kane is an absolute steal. It's an absolute bargain. Because if you look at the way that market for strikers has exploded since then, to get a player who'll guarantee you goals, and not just guarantee you goals, but you got to remember the context of how he stepped into that Bayern team. He stepped in to replace arguably the greatest striker of his generation in Robert Lewandowski. I know, obviously, Messi and Ronaldo are known as better players in that generation, but in terms of an actual striker, if you don't want to count Ronaldo and Messi as strikers, at least for most of their career, I think Lewandowski arguably is the best striker of his generation. Arguably, he is the best goal scorer in Bayern history. So, I mean, to come in and step into his shoes and just hit the ground running, never look back, and just kind of get better and better is honestly remarkable. And I know he scored a lot of penalties, and I know I make fun of him for it, but he also scores a lot of great goals as well. And I think a cynic like myself might point to some of the defending we saw against Werder Bremen in that game, particularly the first goal where Michael Olise could have set up a picnic on the edge of that Bremen box before putting that cross in, and no one would have came to stop him. And seriously question some of the quality of the teams in the league this season, to be perfectly honest with you. However, he's shown it in the Champions League. He's shown it in the big games as well to an extent. And he looks at the absolute peak of his powers right now, Manu. And it's great to see.
I don't have the exact number on it, but our colleague at Transfermarkt, Ben Littlemore, did a piece on the top scorers in the Champions League. And since Harry Kane joined Bayern Munich, no other player has scored more often in the Champions League than he has, right? And that is the peak competition in European football. So it's not like he's just scoring against the quote-unquote postman in the Bundesliga. He's scoring against the very best teams in European football on an extremely consistent basis. And I think, I think that is something that has to be applauded for. This is a really, really hard record to achieve, the one that he achieved. Lewandowski didn't get that sort of record, right? To score 100 goals in 104 games with a new club is really, really difficult. Before him, Cristiano Ronaldo did it, and then Erling Haaland did it, and the accolades that he received for doing it, right? With an unbelievable Man City side that he joined. That speaks for itself. And I think the other thing that I find really impressive about the story is how he is really taking the being at Bayern and in Munich and the city and taking over a more important role at the club quite serious. There's other players at the club that have an ever increasing role that do not stop and speak to the media after every game. He stops and speaks to the media after every single game. He understands that with Thomas Müller gone, there is a big void there. Someone has to be the voice of the club, and he does it. No question asked. He will stop and he will talk to the media. He will be professional about it, right? He will also speak about topics that are difficult to speak about, like ahead of the season when I asked him about the squad size. No problem answering that at all, right? And I think that is something that he's definitely taking on a bigger responsibility this year. And he's taking on the bigger responsibility while still scoring like clockwork. And I think that is very impressive. And I think to your comments about strikers, it is kind of mind-boggling the way transfer fees have gone in that regard, right? That getting a true scorer, and I think this is the hunt for it. So many clubs are looking for one that can just guarantee you goals. But I remember when Juventus spent close to 100 million euros, or I think it was 100 million euros for Gonzalo Higuain, and this is a few years ago now, right? 6, 7, 8 years now. And then they did it again for Vlahovic, and then the whole thing about Victor Osimhen, and this search for a true number 9 and how hard it is to get one, when there really is only, if I think about true world-class number 9s that are standing above and beyond everyone else, I can really only think of 3. That is Harry Kane, Robert Lewandowski, and Erling Haaland.
Yeah. Do you know, I was just looking up actually the most expensive strikers of all time on this tremendous website called Transfermarkt. You should really go
It's
check
almost
it out
like we work
sometime.
for them.
In the same year, in the same season that Bayern bought Harry Kane for 95 million euros, PSG spent 95 million euros on Randall Cole Mullany. And Liverpool also spent 95 million euros on Hugo Ekitike this summer. You could argue whether he's the complete striker as well. Alexander Isaac obviously went for 145 million euros. Just the season before Harry Kane, Liverpool spent 85 million euros on Darwin Núñez. Man United spent 78 million euros the summer that Kane moved to Bayern on
Yikes.
Rasmus Højlund. Al Nassr spent 77 million euros on John Duran, which didn't work out either. There's countless examples in and around the time Harry Kane moved to Bayern and since then of how much of a premium the transfer market, puts on strikers right now, and it's more often than not completely unjustified. But certainly in the case of Bayern Munich, I doubt there's anyone at the club who's now regretting paying what they paid for Harry Kane, and that's a huge testament to his performances.
No, absolutely, and I think the Premier League have some bad news for Premier League clubs that are hoping he's coming back. I don't think he's coming back anytime soon.
No, but I gotta be honest, Manu. I really question these transfer rumors. To be honest with you, like having just praised Harry Kane and said, "Wow, look how amazing he is." I don't know which self-respecting football club is going to buy Harry Kane next year at 33 years of age and say, this guy is the solution to all our problems.
Excuse me.
Well, they just spent a record amount of money on a Bundesliga striker and Benjamin Sesko. Maybe Man United, but I mean, I think if he was to go, it would be a bit like Ronaldo leaving Juventus, where it was something that Juventus wanted to sell him, Ronaldo wanted to leave, and you could tell that Ronaldo's people worked tirelessly with Bayern United to find some sort of deal to get him to go to the club, and that was for a very reduced transfer fee. I can't see anything like that happening with Harry Kane because, as you said, he's loving playing for Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich love having him. And I can't imagine there'll be any situation where they're in a rush to sell him to another club. But crazier things have happened. But for now, Manu, I think he seems very, very happy in Munich.